Why the ever go to Bali when you could be in Dubai enjoying this? What do you prefer, Bali or Dubai?
If you took a picture of the coffee shop and zoomed out, you would see what the reality was. And I don't think the reality of Bali is shown much or at all.
Thanks for, honestly, the Emirates, because any other airline that had missile threats coming in would not have been flying. And we've made it to Bali. But no, I will not be flying back to the UK if I can help it. After this holiday, we'll be going back to Dubai.
Everyone says come to Bali, it's an amazing place to come. Honestly, I absolutely hate it. Look at this. Traffic is everywhere. Look how built up it is. It is awful.
So due to Israel and America and the Gulf states' war on Iran, Dubai has increasingly come into focus as the mirage of Dubai is basically crumbling as tourist numbers plummet and the authoritarian nature of the UAE government comes to light. Now, many people, of course, knew Dubai to be this tourist paradise built on the backs of Southeast Asian and South Asian migrant labourer, which essentially created a two-tier society for wealthier Arabs and Westerners and the rest of Dubai. And lots of people took like great pleasure in seeing Dubai being attacked by Iran. I made the point in my video that like most people in Dubai are like these migrant labourers, and these Westerners who are the disgusting minority, they go to Dubai specifically so they can have a surf class, and they just want to have servants, essentially slaves, many of them, and they also want to dodge tax. Now, something else I want to talk about as well is that there have been plans put in place to turn Gaza into some sort of similar Western tourist hotspot. And why I bring that up today is because we are talking about Bali, and Bali blends both of these. It's a place filled with the worst types of Westerners who go so essentially they can be served by the local population and treat Bali as a playground where there are no rules, or they feel like there are no rules. But just like what's happening with Gaza, Bali's whole tourism industry is built on basically the mass graves of the genocide that started in 1965. And this was done with intention to erase what happened, to erase all the mass killings, and to also serve as propaganda for the Indonesian state to promote themselves to Westerners. Because if you ask most Western people, what do you know about Indonesia? If they know Bali is in Indonesia, which some of them don't, they think it's like its own country, they will say they know about Bali. And they've mainly been to Indonesia by going to Bali. And while Bali has historically, over the last 60 years, served as propaganda and whitewashing of the crimes of the Indonesian government during that period, it also serves as current propaganda to distract from the crimes of the Indonesian government right now, whether that's due to occupation of disputed territories or its treatment of its own citizens. Bali is Indonesia's main propaganda, I guess, showpiece to the world of like, come to this tropical paradise, come to this place where you can live an easy life, you can enjoy Balinese culture, you can just have this freedom you don't get in the West. And obviously, the people who suffer the most because of this over-tourism are the Indonesians who live in Bali itself. And as we're seeing more and more, and as we see in places like Hawaii, loads of Westerners are developing land and they're making these gated communities that are exclusively for Westerners, and increasingly basically making local Balinese people and local Indonesian people second-class citizens in their own country. So I want to talk about all of this today because Bali, I don't think gets the same scrutiny as places like Dubai, but it definitely should. And I do also want to talk about just the ethics of tourism generally in regards to Bali. And this is a video I've been thinking about making for a long, long time. Like many Westerners, I'm sure you know people in your own life who've been to Bali. Maybe you've been to Bali yourself, but I hope you'll listen to this video. And before we go any further, if you want to support my work, please check out my Patreon page and my YouTube memberships. If you want to follow me on social media, please check me out on Instagram and Blue Sky at the Kavernacle. And also, if you like this video after you've watched it, please leave a like and maybe subscribe to the channel for more videos. I think before we get into all the issues of Bali, the terrible history of Indonesia and Bali and everything to do with this, I think we have to talk about like ethical tourism, Western tourism, because as many people point out in my videos about Dubai, like if you've done types of tourism around the world, you are probably a hypocrite for saying to people, going to Dubai is unethical, going to Bali is unethical, but you've been to another place. I'm not super harsh against people who've done a lot of traveling to places with bad governments. If someone has been to like Russia, Indonesia, or a whole host of like other countries, I'm not inherently saying like you're a bad person and you shouldn't have gone to these places. I think there are just certain places like Dubai, like Bali, that are just like such a combination of different terrible things that I think like you should avoid these places. And in Bali's case, you have the issues of over tourism, you have the issues of like terrible tourist behavior, you have the issues of Westerners developing the land exclusively for themselves, and you have the issues of it being used as propaganda by the Indonesian government to cover up their historic and current crimes. All of that combined makes it unethical to go to Bali, the same way Dubai has a whole host of issues as well, and the same way the future Gaza tourism zone will have all these issues as well. But that obviously feels a lot more fresh to us because we've actually witnessed all the mass killing there to make room for what these people want to build. But also, if you have gone to Bali, like I said in my Dubai video, if you have been to Dubai and you've been to Bali and you've been to one of these unethical places, I don't think you're a terrible person. I don't think you're irredeemable. You probably didn't know better because you fell for the propaganda like most people do. Most people don't understand that these city-states, that these islands or cities, they're built on bad things because that's the whole point of the propaganda in the first place. This is advertised to you as something like great that everybody goes to and no one has any issues with. And not that I would call them out to their face, but I have friends who have been to Bali and they've had like a nice time and stuff. And I'm sure it is a nice time because that's what it's designed for. It is designed for Westerners to go and have a cheap tropical holiday like many places around the world. And I'm someone who's like lived abroad. I'm someone who's traveled a lot to other European countries, to poorer countries in Asia like Vietnam and Thailand. So you can call me a hypocrite all day. I try and be as ethical as possible. I try and totally avoid places suffering from over tourism. For Vietnam, I've stayed in places like Hanoi, which are popular with tourists, but it's not completely overrun with tourists. That's why I wouldn't go to somewhere like Da Nang, for example, and one of these other places that people often call like the next Bali. Although Da Nang doesn't have the ethical problems of Bali in terms of what it's being used for and what it's covering up and what it's built on, at the same time, it does share some of the similarities of you are going to a beach holiday resort, which is increasingly being completely taken over by Westerners and Russians and Ukrainians and Israelis. And they're designing this place just for them rather than trying to kind of like fit in with society. And many of these cities are global cities. Places like Bangkok, it's another place I've lived, which is obviously one of the most popular cities in the entire world, but it doesn't completely rely on Western tourism. And it's such a massive city, such an international city. I don't think you'd say it really suffers from over tourism. It's kind of like London, which is where I was born and where I'm from. Even though London is one of the most visited cities in the entire world for tourism, if you live there and grow up there, you know there's just like certain places that tourists stick, and they don't generally go where native Londoners live. I know Thailand also has that element of being like a very cheap place, but I'd say for like the major urban cities, I don't think many of these suffer with over tourism. But with Thailand, if you go out to like the Thai islands, you do see the same problems that you get in places like Bali, places like the Philippines. And I know a lot of people on the left, they're super judgmental. They think you shouldn't go on holiday to any of these places. They think you shouldn't live in any of these places. I'm not so hard line on that. I just think you have to be very aware as a Westerner who has more money than local people who comes to these places. Like, are you having a bad impact on this city? Are you having a bad impact on this place? You know, I've played football in Vietnam and many people in the football team were local Vietnamese from Hanoi. Other people were English teachers or students from different Asian countries. And it was a really interesting insight in the types of people who come to these cities, and they don't come purely for partying, like tax havens, crypto, sex tourism, all that other stuff. They're just people living their normal lives, people who work for international embassies. And it was a really cool insight into all of that stuff because it made me appreciate how just like basically globalized the world is, but just how many people, even Westerners, come to these places for a lot purer motivations than I want to go to somewhere that has like a native surf class that exists just to serve me food or deliver me food or drive me places or serve me drinks, and I won't actually interact with the local culture. In fact, I'll participate in destroying the local culture through over-tourism and participating, in some cases, as we'll see today, in developing this land to make it exclusive for Westerners. And like I said, I will always recognise there are ethical problems of living in other countries when you're bringing like your savings that you've made in other countries and you have a disproportionate amount of buying power. But I just think even in Southeast Asia, even in these poorer countries, there is a way to do it which is more ethical, and there are places you can go that aren't being destroyed by over-tourism. But this isn't just like a Southeast Asian problem. Look at some places in southern Spain, Mexico City, places in South America. Over-tourism is rife around the world. And I just think there is an ethical way, as Westerners who do have the luxury, having very powerful passports, having, you know, enough money to go on holiday, I just think there's a way you can do all these things without having like a massively negative impact on local cultures or local economies. So like I said, I know there are a lot of people on the left who are very, very hardline against tourism, against living abroad, against teaching English abroad and all that other stuff. I'm not one of those people, but I do have my red lines, and Dubai is one, Bali is one, Saudi Arabia is one, Israel, of course, is one. And I'm someone who would love to visit certain places. Like, I would love to go see some of the stuff in Saudi Arabia. I'm never going to go because of the government and how I feel about it. But there's so much cool history stuff I'd love to see there. There's so many cool stuff around the entire world in many of these countries that I would love to see. You guys know me. I absolutely love my history. As depressing as these videos are that I'm making today, I like making them because I get to cover history and geopolitics. But at the same time, there are just certain countries and governments I don't want to support at all. So let's delve deeper into the video. So something I want to say to connect my videos together, because of what's happening in Dubai right now, there's like a war between the most terrible influencer expat communities you can imagine, all arguing about, is Dubai better than Bali? Like, what's better? And also a lot of them are moving between the two. Like, they're fleeing from Dubai right now to go to Bali. And I think that says it all about the shared similarities between them and what these people go to these places for. They don't go for like the local cuisine. They don't go for the like heritage sites. They don't go for the history. They don't go for the culture. They don't go for the music. They literally go because they want a surf class of people to serve them, and they want a luxury lifestyle that is cheaper than in Western countries. So here's a few TikToks I found of people either arguing or talking about like them fleeing from Dubai to go to Bali, but they're going to be going back to Dubai at some point.
Why the f would you ever go to Bali when you could be in Dubai enjoying this? I'm still on a 100-foot super yacht where I'm with friends today, enjoying the sun, with a backdrop like that. There is nothing else in the world like it. Frankly, I don't fancy living in the jungle, and I don't fancy rolling around in mud with elephants. I fancy living the high life, enjoying my life, eating the best food, riding out on super yachts, and basically making life worth living. What do you prefer, Bali or Dubai?
You see, people say that we get paid for saying good things about the UAE. Now, I wish we did, because if I was getting paid, I sure as hell would take it. But thanks for, honestly, the Emirates, because any other airline that had missile threats coming in would not have been flying. They managed it, it wasn't chaotic, and we was able to get on our flight on time, and we've made it to Bali. But no, I will not be flying back to the UK if I can help it. After this holiday, we'll be going back to Dubai. The place is beautiful. We didn't choose to go for a villa because I've got to be a parent and I'm with my daughter. I just feel like that's too much responsibility for me. Like, I thought we'll get a hotel as it's our first time, and the responsibility then falls on the hotel. I ain't adulting.
So finally we are leaving Dubai. Yes, you heard it here first. Now I hear you saying, is it the war, Matt? Is it because you're scared, Matt? And the truth is, we're going to Bali. I had Bali booked on a business trip before the war started. So yeah, leaving for Bali for 2 months, and then we're gonna redeploy somewhere, presumably back here. We're off to Bali, see if we like it, make that a second home. We'll see.
So I always try not to be too judgmental of people. And sometimes I realize my bubble when I watch these TikToks, because I have such a visceral reaction to watching these people. Like, I hate them so bad. I hate them so bad, it makes me hate humanity. Most people are more like this, or they want to be like this, than people who are actually like me. And it is just like so depressing that people just go to these places without any critical thinking skills, without even any shame, and they're just like talking about why they like it so much and why they like this lifestyle it affords them, not caring that this lifestyle is built on like terrible things. And both Bali and Dubai have unique aspects, but it often manifests in the same thing. And here is another influencer, Molly May, who is just one of those Love Island influencers in the UK. Her sister went to Bali and left after 48 hours to go back to Dubai.
If you took a picture of the coffee shop and zoomed out, you would see what the reality was. And I don't think the reality of Bali is shown much or at all, if I'm going to be completely honest. And I do think it is down to a lot of influencers.
So that is influencer culture in a nutshell. An influencer goes to Bali because she's seen it on TikTok being promoted as like a paradise, heaven on earth, and then sees that, yeah, like you're going to like a poorer part of the world and it's not going to be totally pristine. You're going to somewhere that has like jungles and stuff and is not as developed as Dubai. And they get there and they're like, oh, it's actually not as nice as we thought. Let's go back to Dubai. And as you saw that other guy talking about like why he loves Dubai so much, you can see why certain people who are even more materialistic than the terrible communities you find in Bali, why they can't even stand going to there. But they do serve the same purpose. Bali is more for the aspirational crypto bros, where Dubai are for the ones who have a bit more money because it is far more expensive. But yeah, like I said, I just watch all these people and just think about influencer culture. I just get so depressed and mad. Like, it's so radicalizing. I'm just like, the world is actually on fire right now. And I'm just watching all these terrible people just like laugh it up, enjoying all the money they made, probably through terrible industries, and just not give a fuck about anything in the world generally, but not give a fuck about the places they're staying, the history of it, what they're doing by even going there, like the damage their own over-tourism is causing, and having just like zero self-awareness generally. But I thought I'd show you some of them just to get you mad, get you mad before going into the rest of it. So just to move on, I want to now go into more specific problems and what Bali represents to people and the issues being caused by over-tourism. So the Times had an article called How Bali Became the Influencer Hotspot. So why are so many influencers flocking to this Indonesian island? One big reason is the cost of living in Bali is so cheap compared with London or cities like Lisbon. I paid £2 for a beer, £4 for a wax, £15 for a massage, and £2 for a 20-minute bike taxi. It's also a sunny, aesthetically pleasing place to take photos of social media. It's not hard to see why their posts put in so many likes. Everyone likes sun-soaked, beachy content. The one thing I would say is £2 for a beer cheap. I'm pretty sure I've drank 40-cent beer in Spain before. But going on, Inga Valentina, 33, the former Made in Chelsea star with 110,000 Instagram followers, has spent a large amount of time in Bali since 2018. She's talking to me from Canggu, an influencer hotspot. I know loads of influencers who live out here. It's a little hub. Even when I got here in 2018, it already seemed like the place where influencers were coming. The expat community here gets bigger each year. A huge portion of that are influencers, and there's a lot of crypto bros, she says. It's much easier for influencers to find things to post here than in rainy London, she says. When I was doing content back in London, I struggled with it. It was grey and the lighting was terrible. Whereas here, there's so many pool clubs, fitness places, and villas. Everywhere is a backdrop for good content. The lighting, sun, everything's just so aesthetic here. And again, like I've been saying, I hate influencers so much. Like the zero self-awareness of, yeah, London is a bad backdrop for my influencer content. Better go to Bali because that's all I see it as. It's not a place with real people who I'm participating in the exploitation of. It's just an aesthetic backdrop that will get me more Instagram followers. And it's just so insane someone from London saying that as well. Like, London is one of my favorite places in the world. If I could afford that in London, I would not be complaining. So the author saying, I stayed near Canggu, which Valentina calls the influencer hub. It's filled with fancy restaurants, co-working spaces and gyms. I had a facial, did yoga in studios overlooking rice paddies, and ate in bougie brunch spots. All of this cost me a fraction of what it would have done in London. Influencers can live and film a very glamorous lifestyle here without spending much. It's like a fantasy world. We don't really cook because it's so cheap to eat out. It's so cheap to get your laundry done. You don't have to lift a finger, Valentina says. Valentina stopped making content in Bali because her followers didn't seem interested in beach shots and they wanted updates about her love life. It was also too costly for fashion brands to send her clothes to model on Instagram for a fee. They'd have to pay a 40% customs tax. She says Bali has become this slightly westernized area of Asia where it's so easy to live. It's very easy to get a visa. It's cheap. It has become this little luxury town. But it's becoming overpopulated because of that. So like I said, when these people talk about the benefits of living in Bali, do they talk about the people? Do they talk about the culture? Do they talk about the nature? Do they talk about the history? Do they talk about anything that is outside the realms of just being completely self-centered? It's all about yoga studios and fancy restaurants and places that you could get back home, but they're cheaper. That's literally it. They're literally living there because it's cheaper, and that's the only benefit they see. It's cheaper and the weather's nice, and for a lot of them, I don't really have to follow any rules. I can ride a bike without a license, I can ride a bike without a helmet, and I'll just bribe the police or bribe someone if I crash into them. There's no real rules for me, and I feel that happens a lot with these people, is that because even in a country with pretty conservative laws like Indonesia throughout its various islands, they just feel like because they're Westerners, they're exempt from it. And I think, was it Bonnie Blue who got in trouble with the law in Indonesia for filming stuff there, even though it's like against the law? They just feel so untouchable by it because they don't view this, like I said, as a real place. It exists outside laws, outside nation states, some horrible influencer utopia where they can just do whatever the fuck they want, and it's so cheap. And obviously, when you get places like this, the Financial Times reporting, crypto bros descend on Silicon Bali. With its ocean views and beach resorts, Bali has long attracted surfers and holiday goers, but it's also a premier destination for the world's crypto enthusiasts. Among the recent arrivals is 33-year-old Russian blockchain entrepreneur Ilya Maximenko, who came to Indonesia in 2020. It's very easy to meet the right people. In terms of Southeast Asia, Bali is like the international hub of crypto. When you come to Bali, you have maybe a 10 times cheaper life than California, but you have the same comfort level and much higher quality of food. People prefer to come here and live the tropical life. It's very heavy on males, white males, people in their early 20s. So this is why I'm always just like so suspicious of people who go to Bali, because even in terms of like expat communities there, it's just the worst people ever. How can you be a normal person and want to go to one of these places and want to go live in one of these places with other Westerners? You're just going to be interacting with IDF soldiers on leave, Australian miners on FIFO, loads of crypto bros, and loads of people who are just into the financial world generally. I really just struggle to see the attraction at all. But as they constantly say, it's all about the cheapness. It's all about the cheapness and the comfort level. And I guess for a lot of them, it doesn't matter where. And that's why I've seen a lot of people say Da Nang in Vietnam is the new Bali, because they're saying, oh, Bali's too expensive, Bali's too overcrowded, Bali's too dirty, go to Vietnam. And especially because I'm not sure about the Indonesian currency. I know the dong is pretty weak against Western currency right now, so your money's going to go even further. But before we talk about a few other things, I saw this TikTok going viral for the wrong reason. It's a woman who goes to like this famous shrine in Bali and basically talks about how rubbish it is. And I feel like this is another problem with over-tourism. Because of social media and TikTok, I don't think most people know why they go places. If I'm strictly speaking now in terms of tourism and not like expat communities and stuff, I said this before with places I've been in Vietnam, like Sapa is this quite famous place for backpackers to go, and it's really advertised by people like go to this like mountain town, go see these like ethnic villages and stuff. And like I said to you, I'm really interested in the history of Vietnam. Like I really love that period of history. Did so much of my history degree on the Vietnam War. So I love going to see all this stuff. I'm even interested in like the ethnic peoples there, especially in terms of their relationship with the government. Hasn't always been very good, especially just after the end of the war. But even when I went there, I felt a bit gross. And when I see all these people going around like this place called Cat Village and they're all dressing up in their ethnic outfits, and I'm just thinking, why do you want to come here? Like, why do you want to be here? You don't want to be here. There is no part of you probably that ever even wanted to come to Vietnam organically. Like, you didn't want to come to this place for the history or the culture or the language or the nature. You want to come here because it's what people do. You want to come here because you've been told to on TikTok and social media generally. I feel that's why so many people come to Southeast Asia overall. You're just told to by TikTok. So this TikTok you're going to see right here, it's just someone who's gone to this place because they were told to by social media, and even them slating it and saying how shit it is and still getting their influencer picture, I think shows so much what's wrong with just all this influencer culture around traveling. They don't even want to be at this place. They have no interest in what this place represents. They have no interest in the history, and they're going to tell everyone it's rubbish and don't come here, but I'm still going to get my influencer picture for Instagram.
Did you guys see this?
I'm visiting Bali's most famous temple, and it's literally the most underwhelming thing I've ever seen. It is literally just this. Like, this is the famous view. We're literally waiting in the shade for hours. I have number 304, and they just called number 194. I'm gonna be here forever. It is 1:14, and there are exactly 100 people in front of me. Let's see how long it takes until I'm able to get my picture. So I've been waiting for about an hour and a half, and there's only 30 people left in front of me. So I'm going to journal a little while waiting.
304, please.
So after waiting for 2 hours, I finally got my picture, and I'm ready to get the hell out of here.
This is coming from Mathilde, who is a full-time travel influencer that is traveling the world on $30 a day. Imagine going to the Lepuyang temple and thinking it's the most underwhelming thing after it lasting for over 1,000 years.
So like I've been saying, zero self-awareness. Doesn't care that this might be offensive to people who live in Bali, doesn't care about the cultural significance of this, doesn't care about the history, just, yeah, I'm going to do this for TikTok and then say it's shit. I think a lot of what I've spoke about here are more general problems with influencer culture, travel culture, and even just general Western tourism in these parts of the world. It's not done out of an organic desire to see the world. It's not done out of an organic desire to travel, meet new people, explore places you've always been fascinated with. Like I said to you guys, there are so many places I would love to go that I'm not going to let myself go to because of the ethical stuff. But the number one reason I like traveling to different countries is learning about history, is the culture, and getting to see that. Something I've done fairly recently is because I was going around parts of Asia where Christianity is a minority religion, I would just go to a church and you'd like walk towards a church, you'd go see this church, but then upon that walk, you discover loads of other stuff and you go to different areas. I remember there's this place in Bangkok, which is near this Catholic church, and it's got like these transformers everywhere. And then if you go like walk towards the Catholic church from Chinatown, which is another cool part, you just see so many scrapped cars. It stinks of petrol. You see so many like mechanical shops and stuff like that. And walking through that, I'm like, oh, this is so interesting. Like, why is this area of Bangkok have all these cars? And then I read about it afterwards, and I read about why they had the transformers, which they made with scrap from the cars and stuff. And that was just like such a cool experience to me, to just learn more stuff, to see what this is like, and just kind of like expand how you even view certain countries. That's why I liked it so much. But like I said, in this influencer-driven tourism age, people don't even know why they're doing stuff, and they just want to hit the checklist. When I see itineraries on travel subreddits, it's always them trying to squeeze in as much as possible. Even like people going to Thailand, going to the Thai islands, they want to hit all the islands. And I'm just thinking, why do you want to go to all of these places? Like, why? Because TikTok told you to. That's literally it. But now let's get into the more specific problems with Bali and Western influence in Bali. So I just saw this TikTok of someone who's like a property developer in Bali, who's apparently like a multi-millionaire. And I just wanted to like show you him advertising some new property there.
Welcome to Bali, Sam Gowland Developments, the next phase. We have got here 3 villas that are getting built. As you can see here is the first one, all with fantastic views. Second one in the middle, third one at the end. This is a private gated community. All 3 villas are around 420 square meters with a beautiful view, and all 3 villas are sold out off plan, of course, because I don't want to blow my own trumpet, but I'm quite good at what I do and I've got a good reputation now. So before there was even a spade in the ground, all 3 villas were sold.
So essentially what you're seeing there, which is something that's going on in a lot of the poorer countries in Southeast Asia that don't have as strict laws on buying property and buying land, is just random Western entrepreneurs coming in and buying up the land and developing it to create gated communities that will not be inhabited by anyone from the local area. And it's also the parasitic nature of this type of just like Western investment of course, the people working on that construction are Indonesians, are Balinese people who benefit in the short term. And because they're from a poorer place, this is probably like a better contract, they're getting better money. So they're not going to refuse this. But then what happens is they're building up these communities that in the long term are going to negatively affect the whole island. They're going to raise prices generally. They're going to take over land that could be developed for local people. Or here's the thing generally, if you're not like totally against like these types of immigrants, like Western influencers and shit like that, they're not building like tower blocks that other people can afford. They're just building very, very wasteful, massive villas, buying up the land and taking over this whole area, making it a private road. In my opinion, it's just a form of economic colonialism, and you see that in places like Puerto Rico, Hawaii. It happens in a lot of places where there aren't like really strong laws against foreigners owning property, and there's a lot of corruption in the local government which allows these things to happen. I'm not saying this guy specifically done that. I was actually reading up about Indonesian laws in regard to this because I thought it might be quite strict and you might need to actually bribe people, but it does appear to be fairly straightforward to build things like villas in places like Bali if you have enough money, even if you are a Westerner and you are a foreigner. But it's just something that is indicative of what's happening around the world, especially in terms of globalism. Now so many Westerners can live and work anywhere. It allows them the opportunity to go to all of these places and essentially colonize them. And like I said, not even trying to integrate, not working for the local government, not working for local companies and helping with maybe expertise that they might need. It's literally like, come and do your crypto job, build a villa for yourself in a gated community, and like never ever even interact with the local population, and you're just coming here for the cost of living. So now let's get into an article that details a lot of these problems. So Time wrote an article, Can Bali Ever Solve Its Over-Tourism Conundrum? So Bali's foreign visitors represent at once both its primary economic driver and its biggest headache. Unruly tourists have caused traffic jams and public commotions, offended local sensibilities, trashed the environment, and desecrated sacred sites. They also account for 60 to 70% of its regional GDP, according to 2019 estimates. Bali saw 6 million international visitors last year, surpassing its pre-pandemic peak of 6.28 million in 2019, representing nearly half of the country's total 2024 visitors, but it still wants more. The head of the Provincial Tourism Office, Tijok Bagus Pimayan, set a target of 6.5 million visitors in 2025, but he acknowledged that such a feat would exacerbate the challenges of over-tourism the island of 4.4 million already faces. Earlier this week, the governor of the island, Wayan Costa, who returned to office last February, announced that he would set out to do just that, updating a list of do's and don'ts that have been tucked into visitors' passports since 2023. The do's: dress appropriately at religious and sacred sites and ceremonies, obey traffic laws, stay at licensed accommodations, don't trespass sacred areas, litter, climb sacred trees or monuments, behave disrespectfully such as swearing or using single-use plastics. Other measures are being weighed to stop the unruliness. Last year, Indonesia suspended the construction of new hotels in parts of Bali amid the fears of overdevelopment, and in 2023, Costa issued a development plan for Bali's next century that acknowledged the impacts of over-tourism. But not all measures have come to pass, and in March 2023, Costa announced that tourists would be banned from riding motorcycles following a series of accidents and traffic violations, but it was never fully implemented. The most promising measure to address Bali's tourist problem, some believe, is a tourist tax. Pemayan said, "One of the concerns is that Bali is being sold as a cheap tourist destination. Hopefully we can minimize that so we can do better for Bali in future." And then a BBC article talks about the cultural impact. Locals say their island has changed under the demands of tourism. And when they hear of complaints that it's not the paradise travellers signed up for, some point out that such comments are dripping with irony. When tourists said they're disappointed with Bali being more crowded, they are also part of the crowd, says Imade Vikananda, a Balinese researcher who advocates for the protection of the island's nature and people. It's like when we're in traffic, we're like, why is there so much traffic? But we're in a car. We are the ones driving the car. We are the ones making the traffic, he said. 22-year-old Ni Kadak Cynthia recalls a time when she used to ride her scooter through the quiet roads of Canggu, that place where that influencer was talking about earlier, past paddy fields where she would take a lunch break. 5 years on, Canggu is some of the worst traffic on the island, and Miss Cynthia's journey to her job in a wellness resort is lined with villas and cafes, and impatient honks follow her all the way. "I wouldn't bother stopping, let alone rest there," she said. "Now every time I ride past the spot I used to sit, there's a feeling of sadness. I feel that Bali is being eroded day by day." People treat Bali a bit like a playground. Barely a month goes by without misbehaving tourists making headlines. They have been in serious accidents after riding scooters intoxicated or without helmets. Foreigners were deported for getting naked at sacred sites, and others got in trouble for drunken brawls. Adding to recent tensions are thousands of Russians and Ukrainians who have fled the war, and there's been a lot of stories of Russian and Ukrainian drug gangs operating in Bali, with many of them being caught and sentenced with pretty harsh punishments. At the same time, with a country like Indonesia and a lot of the local corruption you find throughout Southeast Asia, stands to reason a lot of them aren't actually being dealt with. The article going on to say, local resentment is rising, with social media vigilantes putting misbehaving tourists on blast. A lot of tourists think because they're the ones with money to spend on our island, we locals should be okay with whatever they do, says Miss Cynthia, who, like many of her generation, have come to rely on the stability of a career in tourism. The rapid development of people like we saw earlier making these villas has also had an effect on natural disasters. So after deadly floods in Bali, its people want answers, and many are blaming over-tourism. Floods in September 2025 killed at least 18 people. Outside of heavy rainfall, the authorities have blamed two things: overdevelopment and trash. So like I said, it's a parasitic relationship between tourism, over-tourism, and local populations, because obviously as more people come to the island and set up businesses there are more jobs to be had, but then the price of everything gets raised. The developments around for housing and things like that are increasingly catered solely towards people with money, just like what's happened with Hawaii as well. The poorest people in Hawaii are the natives who've had their land stolen by people like Mark Zuckerberg developed just for an exclusive group of crypto bros or influencers or people with a lot of money, and completely destroys another group of people's country. And that's what's happening in Bali as well. But as you saw in some of those quotes from officials, if the Indonesian and Bali authorities do really crack down on a lot of stuff, and they make it a lot harder to come to Bali, or they make it more expensive, this kind of flow of crypto bros and influencers, it will always find another place, because Dubai is like the elite version of this. It's where the most wealthy go because they're the ones who can afford it. But Bali is like many places in Southeast Asia. It's the cheaper version for the more aspirational and the wealthy who can't afford places like Dubai as easily. And like I said, people are saying it could be Da Nang. There's places in the Philippines they're saying could be the next Bali and stuff like that. So you're going to see this again. But now I want to talk about what makes Bali unique as a tourism project. And just like you're seeing with Gaza, it's basically to take something where something terrible has happened and turn it into propaganda for the occupying force or the terrible government. And that is what happened in Indonesia. So you guys might have seen the documentary, The Act of Killing. I saw that when I was doing my A-levels. We went to an early screening because my film teacher was like a massive lefty. So he made us watch a lot of like politically relevant films. But of course, it was about the genocide in Indonesia, where between 500,000 and 1 million people were killed by the government and by vigilantes, like you see in The Act of Killing, or by criminal gangs. And it was part of a wider anti-communist purge in the country, which was also helped by the American government and the CIA. And Bali was one of the worst hit places, and many of the tourist resorts in Bali are built on mass graves because a lot of the victims were actually dug into graves literally on the beaches, like in shallow graves on the beaches. So if you've never heard about this, because many people haven't, you might have heard of the book that came out 6 or so years ago, The Jakarta Method, which detailed not only just about what happened in Indonesia, but how it was kind of like a blueprint for anti-communist genocides and mass killings around the world backed by the CIA. But like I said, while Dubai and Bali might share similarities for what they represent, Bali is also a glimpse into Gaza's future. Just like in Israel itself, where many of its tourist resorts are built on mass graves of Palestinians. Like I said, Bali's tourism project has been done for propaganda of the Indonesian government and to whitewash their crimes, like literally like cover it over with tourism and tourist development. So an article by the Jacobin, The True Story of Indonesia's US-backed anti-communist bloodbath. So on the night of September 30th, 1965, a bungled coup d'etat resulted in the deaths of a handful of Indonesian generals, a lieutenant and a 5-year-old daughter of one of the generals. Within days, a relatively unknown military figure, Suharto, had jumped the chain of command. Suharto had blamed the Indonesian Communist Party, the largest communist party outside of the Soviet Union, and the People's Republic of China for the murders, and he promised revenge. This set in motion a mysterious and often perplexing series of events that led to the downfall of Indonesia's founding president, Sukarno, an anti-imperialist who had sought to forge national unity by combining the forces of nationalism, religion, and communism, and the rise of the authoritarian general Suharto's new order, a period of far-right military dictatorship, massive corruption, and unbridled foreign investment. Suharto both prefigured and outlasts his Chilean analogue, Pinochet. The circle of officers around Suharto immediately incited public opinion against the communists, claiming that there was a massive conspiracy theory that they called the September 30th movement. They warned of an imminent threat of a nationwide communist uprising. On orders from Jakarta, regional commanders began campaigns of arrest, torture, and execution. We don't have the exact numbers, but the army and its allies killed somewhere between 500,000 and 1 million people in the space of a year, with an equivalent number sent to brutal prisons throughout the nation's sprawling archipelago. And the most infamous of all was Buru Island. Prisoners worked as slave laborers for years, and after release they were subject to official repression and treated as pariahs. Even the children of former prisoners faced serious discrimination. The Communist Party was the target of this purge, but it also engulfed many other leftists, including feminists, labour organisers and artists. Because the killers ran the state for decades, a generation of Indonesians ingested a steady stream of lurid propaganda, which claimed the communists had been planning its own campaign of mass murder. Despite the fall of Suharto and the restoration of democracy, this lie remains the official narrative of the Indonesian state, as shown by recent anti-communist demonstrations in Jakarta and book raids in provincial cities, red baiting remains a powerful force in Indonesian politics. So that's the broad overview, but I would say, just like many topics about former colonies creating new nation states, the history of Indonesia is really interesting, but also so complex. And the scope of this would be too far outside this video. But basically what you also have to understand about this, like a lot of people say it's like a bungled coup d'etat, but a lot of what happened wasn't like the Communist Party organizing a massive coup. Like this said, it's the narrative of the Indonesian government, even today, that the communists were threatened to overthrow the government and completely take over Indonesian society and start their own mass killing campaign. And what they also did, because it's a Muslim majority nation, Muslims and communists aren't like natural allies, but they did coexist in Indonesian society. And what the government did and the dictatorship did was really whip up religious fervor against the communists. And things like this obviously take a life of their own, where loads of people who were killed obviously had nothing to do with any political group. They were just targeted by their neighbors. Often what you see in genocide, the violence kind of just becomes spontaneous in places as well. But Bali was really badly hit by this genocide, and this genocide was covered up at the time by America. There wasn't loads of widespread reporting on it, especially back in the 60s. So the official narrative, which was the communists had threatened to overthrow the government, protecting Indonesia from becoming a stooge of the Soviet Union. The CIA was instrumental in this widespread purge. It gave the government lists of people who'd been in student movements. And just for people who might have any kind of love for the United States, when you read stuff like this, you realize how it is just the most evil country that has ever existed, that it would happily aid some of the worst crimes against humanity of the post-war period, should be radicalizing to anyone. But let's get into specifically about Bali and what happened in Bali. So this article was really good. I'll put the link in the description. Turning Gaza into a holiday resort has precedent. Ask for ghosts of Bali if you can find them. So today, 6 million tourists visit Bali every year, and the sector accounts for 80% of the island's economy. Freddie Speak, a British national, works for a company which offers packaged tours to a few of these 6 million visitors. He moved to Bali in 2019. Freddie became aware that something had happened in the 1960s when someone on his tour asked him about the killings. Prior to that, it had gone undiscussed, both at work and among his friends. I think people who are coming on the tours have found themselves on our website and they're scrolling through and they just think, oh, Bali looks nice and it's a cheap tour. It's a nice accommodation. So yeah, I'm not sure 95% of them would know about the history of it. No, I don't think they are researching it before they come. Freddie reckons that among the 20 or 30 people that he's good friends with in Bali, apart from being vaguely aware that something happened, 90% of them wouldn't know much about it. Even among his Balinese friends, it doesn't really come up in anything, really. There's never any sort of conversation about it. You never hear people reference it. So, of course, in some ways, that is by design. Why people don't talk about it is because the memory of it has been erased by the tourism industry. And that's what's going to happen in Gaza. In like 60 years' time, you're going to be seeing all the influencers go to Gaza and they won't even know what happened in 2023 or what's happening now. They won't know because it will just be like Bali. It'll be people who moved there from other countries running tour guides who don't even know this happened. And also part of what he doesn't understand is, yeah, people in Bali won't talk to you about it because there's such a shame attached to it. Because if your parents were arrested by the government for being communist, or even if they were murdered for being communist, you would have that stigma attached to you. So this is in the 60s. My parents were children in the 60s. I still have grandparents alive today who were born in the 1930s. So it's not that far removed from people. So of course, if this happened in a lifetime of either my parents or grandparents, I would know about it. So if a Westerner is coming up to me and being like, oh, did you know there was like this genocide in Bali? There's still a society which is insanely anti-communist, was ruled by this dictatorship until 1996, and is still ruled by people who did these crimes. Like the current leader of Indonesia has also been implicated in these types of crimes against left-wing movements as well. Of course, they're probably not going to go to a random British guy or American. Yeah, like my parents were arrested for that, or my grandparents were, they were killed for it. Like, they're not going to talk about it. But that's how the propaganda works as well. So the article going on to say, turning the scene of a massacre into one of the most visited places on the planet is a counterintuitive way to conceal it. While not everyone who visits Bali is interested in its culture and history, many are. But for most, there's a permitted, unburied past in Bali, a history and culture which exists beyond the resorts. Speaking in 2010, Dr. I. Negura Suryawan, whose PhD sought to determine the extent of the killings, came to the conclusion that virtually every village in Bali has a mass grave. Soldiers, police officers, and Islamist militiamen rounded up men, women, and teenagers across the island. After being imprisoned, interrogated, and often tortured in scenes similar to those now unfolding in Gaza, they were driven to remote locations and executed. According to the two books, The Jakarta Method by Vincent Bevan and The Dark Side of Paradise by Jeffrey Robinson, Bali's beaches became mass graves, shallow pits dug in the sand. In many cases, bodies were simply dumped in the surf at night. In February 1966, the US Embassy in Jakarta sent an airgram to Washington, estimated that 80,000 people associated with the communists had been murdered in Bali with no end in sight. As US Secretary of Defense, we can assume this message landed on the desk of Robert McNamara, who thought the entire thing was a resounding success. Briefing President Johnson in 1967, Robert McNamara explained that the Indonesian army, led by General Suharto, put down a communist-inspired coup d'etat and then proceeded to eliminate the 3 million members of the Indonesian Communist Party. He continued, "I believe that our military assistance program to Indonesia during the past few years contributed significantly to the army's anti-communist, pro-US orientation and encouraged it to move against the communists when the opportunity was presented." In the immediate aftermath of the killing, waves of Western development began to crash upon the beaches where so many had been killed. In 1966, the Intercontinental Bali Beach Hotel, a 10-story, 566-room leisure complex, opened on Sanur Beach. Still the tallest building on the island, it asserted an international new era for Bali. To quote the World Bank, while attracting relatively little foreign tourism prior to 1967, in the years between 67 and 73, Indonesia experienced rapid growth in the sector. During this 6-year period, the number of visitors to the country increased by more than 50% annually, reaching an estimated 300,000 visitors by 1973. Bali was at the forefront of this. As Western capital flowed into the island's exploding tourism sector, the World Bank established that the Bali Tourism Project, a $60 million program which oversaw the creation of a vast complex of hotels and resorts on the island's southern tip. Luxury hotels sprawling above the bones of disappeared is a reoccurring image in the work of Balinese artist and musician Made Bayak. This, he says, is of course a metaphor. The Bali of mass tourism is built on a Bali of mass graves, but it's also quite literal. It is a reality that occurs in Bali, he says. During the construction of foundations, some hotels and resorts found many human bones in the coastal areas. Several years ago, some beaches that experienced abrasion also showed piles of human bones. Many of these incidents were not reported but were finished with certain ceremonies or rituals. It was never discussed again. Maid is far from the only person with a story about mass graves buried beneath hotels. While working in Bali in the 1990s, the Australian academic Dennis Byrne was startled to hear a friend of a friend mention that 2,000 communists lay buried beneath the Oberoi, a 5-star beachside hotel which had been built by the government in the 1970s and then privatised. The mutual friend had been married to the manager, and some local woman had told her that thousands of communists were killed in 1965 and had been buried in that space between the sea and the fields, which had become the site of the hotel. In 1969, 3 years after 5% of the population had been murdered, the journalist Gilbert N. Grosvenor and his photographer wife Donna visited Bali for National Geographic. Their account, a series of vignettes with titles like Balinese Life, a Continuing Celebration, captures the terrifying speed at which the island had been sanitized for Western pleasure seekers. The article paints a picture of Bali familiar to many of us today. A bangled dancer, a mystical coming-of-age ceremony, all set against the backdrop of rice paddies weaving their way into the clouds. And in February 1968, a year after briefing Johnson about Indonesia, Robert McNamara resigned as the defense secretary because of the Vietnam War. 1 month later, he was appointed the president of the World Bank. Just a month and a half after that, McNamara addressed the directors' meeting at the World Bank. The minutes aren't public, but we know he spoke because it inspired an excited response from one attendee, Singapore's finance minister. In his letter addressed to a senior World Bank official who spoke alongside McNamara, the minister writes, "I have been very interested by the statements made by yourself and Mr. McNamara at the meeting of the executive directors. You will be glad to hear that there are very good prospects of getting Singapore and US capital to put up hotels in Bali, and the Indonesian government has expressed its willingness to offer favourable terms to foreign investment in these hotels." While we may never know what exactly McNamara said, we can only assume that fresh from fomenting the atrocities as the defence secretary and 2 months into his presidency at the World Bank, he was pushing for hotels to be built in Bali. Crucially, this document has been archived by the World Bank in a file titled Indonesia Bali Tourism Project Negotiations 01, meaning this was not just idle talk, rather it was the groundwork for the $16 million World Bank program. In June 1968, McNamara made his first visit as the president of the World Bank to Indonesia, and the bank website states that from the very beginning of his tenure, McNamara took a special interest in Indonesia. So that was long, but I thought it was important to get the whole history out. Like I said, if you read about anything to do with the US involvement in the Cold War, it's just the most radicalizing thing. And when you see the world today and you see what's happening in Iran and you see what's happening in Gaza and you see what's happening in Sudan, the Congo, although it's absolutely horrific, and it is horrific, the one thing you can say is at least we can see what's happening. Because back in the day, you didn't see what's happening. The US would just help a government kill 500,000 to 1 million people and no one would care. And then they'd like destroy all the mass graves to build hotels on top of it and no one would ever talk about it because they create such a climate of fear in the country that people would never talk about this. So it just goes unsaid for decades. And that's what's happening. But I guess it's even worse in a way because this happened in Bali without people really realizing it. But it's going to happen in Gaza, and we all saw it in 4K live stream to our phones. But that is just what colonialism always does. It makes room for Western pleasure. It makes room for Western economic interest. It makes room for capital interest by clearing out land, by destroying native peoples, by destroying ethnic groups. This is absolutely nothing new. Puerto Rico, Cuba in the past, Hawaii, loads of parts of Northern America, loads of parts of Southeast Asia that were colonized by the Europeans, including Indonesia by the Dutch as well. People often think countries like Israel are unique, but they're not. Israel's just currently doing something that America already did for the most part, that New Zealand already did, that Canada already did, that so many countries have already done. And that's what's happening to Gaza right now. It's not new, it's not unique. It's just a country and a group of people doing it right now because they already did it to Bali in the 1960s to the current day. But another part of this is you guys might, hear me talk about all of this and say, obviously that's terrible, but can you really say that if you're going to Bali today, you're complicit in all this stuff that happened? Although I would say, going to a tourist resort built on the mass graves of communists and just random people who were killed horrifically, yeah, I probably wouldn't do that. At the same time, it's not like Indonesia isn't currently also doing more crimes and they're using Bali as propaganda to sanitize their image. And that includes their new leader, Subianto, who's accused of being complicit in various crimes by the old government, including killing leftists and students. This extends to the current Indonesian occupation and crimes in West Papua. Now, because Indonesia is just like this massive landmass of island chains, the history of colonialism there has created so many different issues because it was first occupied by the Dutch, then occupied by the Japanese during the war, but that meant places like West Papua were occupied by Australia during the War of Independence, by Indonesia against the Netherlands. You had parts of it that was still occupied by Australia, and it created a very fractured and divided process towards Indonesian unification, and that includes taking territory that didn't actually want to be part of Indonesia. So Indonesia annexed West Papua in a sham referendum, the Act of Free Choice, in 1969, and has been occupying it ever since. And a statement was put out by the leader of the United Liberation Movement of West Papua, and it read this in 2025. President Wenda said, "Indonesia continues to murder children as they escalate their military operations across West Papua. 2 school children were killed by the occupying military in the build-up to Indonesian Independence Day. Security forces also killed a 14-year-old girl, Puncak Jaya, while 13-year-old Martinus Tebai was murdered on August 10th after soldiers opened fire on a group of youngsters. These killings are the inevitable result of the intensified militarization that has taken place in West Papua since the election of the war criminal Prabowo Subianto. Thousands of additional troops have been deployed to terrorize us, while the new administration has also created an independent military command for all the 5 newly created West Papuan provinces, reinforcing the military infrastructure across our land. Over 100,000 civilians are still displaced, and there's been no justice for the forced disappearance of 12 villages in May. In West Papua, there are 2 connected crimes: ecocide and genocide. Increased violence and displacement in the cities and villages is inseparable from increased destruction in the forest. Soldiers are being sent to Maraut Dogiyai and Intan Jaya in order to protect Indonesian investment in these regions. We are crying out to the world over and over again, screaming that Indonesia is ripping apart our ancestral forest, endangering the entire planet in the process. At the same time, it kills our children. Indonesia has shown just how fragile its grip on West Papua really is. After the ULMWP declared that no West Papuan should celebrate Indonesian Independence Day, soldiers went across the country forcing civilians to raise the Indonesian flag. Indonesia is desperate. Even as they increase their violence, they know that occupation will eventually end. We remember what happened in East Timor, where the worst violence took place in the dying days of the occupation. West Papuans have always spoken with one voice in demanding independence. We never accepted Indonesia. We never raised the red and white. We have our own flag, our own anthem, our own Independence Day. They came with guns to build a state on top of a state. One day soon they will leave and West Papuans will walk their forests and tend their gardens in peace. So just like you see in many colonial ventures, the native West Papuans are treated worse. Indonesia constantly exploits the land for their own profit. And Bali is very much part of their propaganda, even though it's not directly linked. They use Bali to advertise all this Western capital into Indonesia itself, and it also serves as propaganda for Indonesia to make it look like this paradise. And just like how Dubai is for the UAE, serves the exact same function. And West Papua and loads of other places like Western Sahara, Kashmir, are things that are less spoken about because these countries are so in bed with the West. Like Morocco was the first country to recognize the United States. It's been one of its closest allies in the MENA region in Africa for the longest time. Indonesia's been extremely close. None of these countries are going to criticize Indonesia for what it's doing. But make no mistake, if you are going to Bali, you are participating in this campaign of whitewashing, like I said, not just the genocide of the 60s, but the genocide it's doing in its crimes right now. And I hope this whole video is a good case study of why it's like not okay to go to Bali. And like I said, I'm not a zealot about tourism. I'm not even a zealot about going to countries with bad governments that don't treat its citizens very well. I'm not someone who thinks you shouldn't go to anywhere. There are certain countries I wouldn't go. Russia, Saudi Arabia, Indonesia, Israel. And that's because I don't want to support countries that are actively doing like these terrible crimes against humanity. But even more so, when tourism is actually the point. So with Bali and Dubai, they want your tourism as part of this political propaganda campaign for their nation state to whitewash their crimes and to do good PR. The UAE want that in Dubai. They want Dubai to sanitize what they're doing in Sudan. Indonesia want you to come to Bali and don't care about what they're doing in West Papua. So all of these things together, it's all connected, and you just have to ask yourself, do you have to go to these places? Even if you just want to go on vacation to relax somewhere, does it have to be Bali? Like, can you not find anywhere else that isn't this? Do you have to go to Dubai? Do you have to go to these countries that are engaged in this terrible shit right now and are using tourism to cover it up? That's what I think the criteria should be. Like, you should be aware of these things, and you shouldn't go to these places that are doing these tourism projects to cover up their horrible past, but also cover up their crimes right now. So yes, Bali is the Dubai of Asia, and sadly, one day Gaza might be the Bali of the Middle East. That is the video. Let me know what you guys think in the comments, and if you made it this far, thank you for watching.